Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Last Mile for Information Governance. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers, Mark Diamond, Contoural CEO, and David Lavender, VP of Product Strategy at Harmony. Mark Diamond, CEO of Contoural, is one of the industry thought leaders in information governance, including records and information management, control of privacy and other sensitive information, and litigation readiness. Contoural has helped 30% of the Fortune 500, plus many mid-sized and smaller organizations, as well as public sector entities, bridge legal compliance and business needs and policies with effective legal and IT strategies and processes. Mark is a frequent speaker and author addressing over 100 internal corporate audiences each year. David is a frequent contributor at Fast Company and is a founding member of the Reader Advisory Board at CMS Wire, where he writes a monthly column. David holds a master's degree in Science, Technology, and Society and is now pursuing a doctorate in information management, focusing his academic research on exploring the information overload experienced by mobile workers. David is also an international scholar for the Society for the History of Technology. Mark, please get us started.
Thank you very much. And we're going to talk today about an interesting topic, which is SharePoint's last mile challenge. I mean, have you ever felt like you've been through a SharePoint project and maybe you've got the technology in place and the infrastructure and it's been a lot of effort and now all we got to do is get everybody to be able to use it? Well, we're going to talk about that last mile, and that last mile can be a very, very long mile. And we're going to talk today about what you can do to make that mile shorter and essentially allow your SharePoint implementation to be easier, more effective, more compliant, and something your employees will follow a little bit more. Next slide. Our slide today, next slide, is going to be, our discussion today is going to be based on our experiences, and I'm going to talk about probably an area I don't have to talk a lot about, blatantly obvious, which is organizations today have less paper, but they have more email, and they have a whole lot more of unstructured data. And the amount of it is just accumulating. It's like snow in a glacier, that every year we get more and more of this information just piling up and piling up. When we look at an organization, we look at a lot of companies, we look at a lot of other, public sector organizations, and we find on average like 70% of their unstructured data living out in the wild on file shares, either as an expired record or has no business value. It's something that can or should be deleted. And the idea is, well, if we can somehow get that into SharePoint, maybe SharePoint can help us delete it, or maybe we just delete it ahead of time. But organizations do know that this ongoing accumulation of junk in the file shares, there's got to be a better way, and that drives a lot of organizations to using SharePoint more effectively, or wanting to use SharePoint, or other types of enterprise content management systems or other repositories for better being able to manage information. So simple, we put it in SharePoint, it's going to delete it when we don't need it. Job done, right? Well, next slide. Not necessarily. Next slide, please. What we find out there, and this may not be a surprise to many organizations, at SharePoint sort of becomes a dumping ground. We find a lot of organizations, get away from file shares because it's sort of a mess, and then they put everything in SharePoint, and that ends up being a mess. And we've seen an explosion of SharePoint sites. We have one client that's got 1,500 employees and 2,800 SharePoint sites. And what they find, it's difficult to control or find information across the sites. It's ungoverned. There's an early retention set on there. And basically, SharePoint becomes slightly more expensive, but equally ungoverned file share out there. We find a lot of organizations, just a lot of stuff, a lot of junk, a lot of information out there. And it's disappointing because a lot of us, some of you held out hope saying, hey, we're going to move everything to SharePoint and we're going to get rid of this. And now it's all continuing to pile up there. And okay, well, what can we do to be able to address that? Next slide, please. Let's talk about what not to do. One of the pitfalls we find out there is mapping file shares directly into SharePoint, saying, I got a file share over here, I'm going to move it over there. Move it here, move it over there. And just not moving the structure, or I should say the lack of structure, trying to use a tool, you may invalidate the metadata associated at the ownership. And likewise, nobody really knew who owned it, what was in the file shares. And when you just move it into SharePoint, trying to maintain the lack of structure, if you will, who owns it? How long do we save it? Is it sensitive information? Do you need security? So here's the news. Deploying SharePoint isn't really about technology. In some respects, the technology is the easy part. SharePoint deployment, in our view, is really about understanding your data, understanding your documents. Matter of fact, it's when you go from file shares into SharePoint, or when you go to file shares to Office 365, or when you go to file shares to some other type of technology out there, this is a great opportunity for you to get a better understanding of what do you have and who owns it and how long you keep it and how long you keep it secure and what's out there. Because that's the type that will better drive not only more compliance, not only getting rid of the rot or junk, but also, quite frankly, better usage of the information. Next slide, please. See, too often organizations, when they think of SharePoint, well, sometimes they don't even think about it. I would say we have the governance problem. Oh my gosh, we got to do governance. Part of this is about record retention. How long do we save things? Do we save this 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? And SharePoint's pretty good about that. Part of this is about, are we applying the right security? What if this is sensitive information? What if it is privacy? What if this is intellectual property? What other types of this may be personally identifiable information? There's many different types of sensitive data. Well, SharePoint actually does that pretty well. Part of this is about, hey, if and when litigation strikes, or maybe we have some regulator come in, what are we going to be able to do so it's easier if and when that does happen? How can we organize our data so when we have a large discovery, and how do we do e-discovery well? How do we do legal holds well? Well, SharePoint does that pretty well. And part about this is probably the biggest area is that good SharePoint, good information management, good repositories, good content actually make employees more productive because they can find what they need, they can find the valuable information apart from the clutter much more easily. So we got record retention and privacy and e-discovery and employee productivity. It's really, in our view, a combination of putting all 4 of these together. That's the governance problem that we face. Next slide, please. So one of the questions is, well, where should it live? Should it live in an email server? Or should it live in file shares? Or should we live in SharePoint? Or can we put everything in SharePoint? Or should it live in a content management system? Or should it live on on-site paper? Organizations begin to realize that they have too much data all over the place and in many different types of repositories. So let's take this idea that we talked about the last slide, which is we've got different attributes. We've got the privacy, we've got the retention, we've got the accessibility, we've got the security. Let's use that to drive where information should live. Next slide, please. And so one of the things I'd like to say is sometimes organizations want to put the technology first. They say, okay, it's going to be SharePoint, and now let's try and force fit everything into SharePoint, or it's going to be some other type of system. Let's try and put everything out there. Different systems handle data differently in better ways. And the problem is, you know, SharePoint is actually very good, for example, for records with 3 or 5, 7 years, some term-based retention. It's not really the best place for permanent records. And likewise, sometimes there are event-based records. Hey, we're going to have to keep this for maybe the term of somebody's employment plus 3 years. Well, where the term of somebody's employment may be variable for the organization. So part of what we're saying is to get rid of this whole mess, if you will, associated with SharePoint or file shares in their SharePoint is let's start thinking about where stuff should live based on the needs of the documents and the data. and let's get out of this knee-jerk reaction, and we're just going to move everything over. By the way, one of the risks we find out there, we see a lot of times organizations just say, let's get everything moved up into SharePoint. Let's get everything moved up into Office 365, and once it's there, we will reorganize it. All right? And if you've done that, you know, wow, once it's in there, it's actually pretty darn hard to be able to reorganize it. It's difficult. And so we think that some of the decisions on how you structure it or where stuff should be made before you actually do that migration. And again, with an understanding, and don't just dump it all, don't force fit it, just don't say we're going to pick the technology first. There's a better approach. Next slide. One of the issues we find out there is that organizations tend to want to keep media silos, scan paper, or purchasing records. We're just going to have all this in one place and let's move it on all over. Smart thinking allows you to put it in the right place, in the right areas, based on business need, based on function, based on an overall governance framework, not necessarily by just taking this repository, putting it over there, putting it over there. Because a lot of times, if you look where your scanned paper came from, or you look where your purchasing records came from, a lot of time it was organized by convenience and not necessarily by structure. And so this is a good chance to look at your workflow and how you actually put it in place. Next slide, please. All right, here's one of the keys. Maybe you're saying this, well, we actually got some SharePoint deployed and we set it up, but I can't get the darn employees to follow what I want them to do. If the employees would just put the right files in the right place, we wouldn't have any of these problems. How many times have I heard that before? Well, we'll put this in there's something called the 5-second rule. Actually, it's two 5-second rules. The first one is if you drop food on the floor. The second 5-second rule is if you want employees to manually organize a document, if you want manually oriented, complex retention, you know, it doesn't work. If you want them to make a lot of decisions, you at best have 5 seconds. And even if I do it, you know, 5 seconds or 20 seconds per document, or, you know, if it takes 20 seconds, I can spend hours doing this. And with the incoming volume of files that organizations have, or emails, or other types of information that people are trying to classify, that sort of that fire hose that they're being sprayed with, there just isn't time. And so if your document classification processes in SharePoint take longer than 5 seconds, chances are very good that even well-meaning employees will blow off your processes. Not because they're bad employees, it's because you have too complicated processes. Now, some of you may be saying, well, hold it, Mark, you know, but we got to, you know, we got to organize it by retention, and we got to organize it by security, and we got all these different ways to tag it and things like that. We have to be smarter. We've got to make it easy for employees, and this is critically important, make them more productive every step along the way. If we just expect them to do it because they want to do it, because they like having records organized, no, employees for the most part don't really care about records. We've got to provide value for them and make it a simple way for them to be able to save information. Next slide, please. Part of avoid is what I call the perfect taxonomy. We see organizations with really complex, you know, with people, homegrown SharePoint systems, and they take their retention policy and all these different categories, and they take their data security classification policy and all these different categories, and they have this version of this and that variety of this, and they have all these different places to be able to put it. And imagine, put yourself in the shoes of the poor employee that's got a document that they got to file, then they got to navigate over here and they got to navigate over there. And yes, for this given document, there is the place to be able to put it, but it takes a long time to be able to find that. And again, you know, this to the records administrator or the SharePoint administrator or somebody on information security, this may look like a perfect taxonomy. But to the employee, this looks like a pain, and I don't have time to organize all my documents this way. And so what we want to do is be able to present a simpler, easier, better way of being able to do that. So be careful. Avoid, again, we call this the perfect taxonomy. The truth is it's not a perfect taxonomy. It's not a really good taxonomy because it's too complicated for the employee. All right. So we're saying on one hand we're having it complicated. On the other hand, we need something simpler. What are we talking about? Next slide, please. We're a big believer in having a data placement strategy. You want to make it really simple for employees on the front end. Put it a few places. You want to give them a few choices. For any given, by the way, you can have lots of different employees collectively across all the different employees and all the different departments and all the different roles. You can have lots of different places to put stuff. But any given employee, you just want a few choices. You want to be able to accomplish quickly. You want easier to access. You want searchable. You want version control. You want to put the complexity, the tagging, the classification, the ability to enact legal holds on the back end of the system. This is where you want to use it. It's interesting. A lot of organizations want to put the complexity in front of the employees. No, we want to make it very simple for them and put the complexity on the back end of the system. And this is what we call a data placement strategy. And again, make it so simple so every employee can file documents within 4 or 5 seconds. Yeah, I'm going to put it over here. This is where it goes. This is the core of the last mile. This is the part that a lot of organizations sort of skip, and because it's a headache. But I'd rather have a few of us get a headache than have many people, all the employees get a headache. I want a few of. I want to hide the complexity, if you will. Next slide, please. So to do that, you need part of a governance framework. Part of it you need to figure out is, okay, what's my retention? What's my privacy and sensitivity? How often is this going to be discoverable? What's the business value of this? Is this high-low? Who's going to need to access this? These are all things that organizations should think about. And again, a lot of times people think usually about the retention. What's my retention schedule, and how do I translate that into a taxonomy or file plan? But we like to make this multidimensional. Next slide, please. And so I've got a file. Where am I going to put the file? I'm going to put it in a working document, so I'm going to put it in a contract, so I'm going to put it in a finance record. And when I put it there, the system does my data tagging. The system wakes up. The system gets smarter. The system knows all about retention. The system knows about data security classification. The system makes it discoverable. The system knows who can look at this, who can have access controls, to whom we should collaborate this with. And so I program that in the back end. And so the role of the employees is just sort of putting it someplace. I put it here, or I put it here, or I put it here, or I put it here. And again, I have encoded within my repository, my governance framework, I have it encoded in there, and I just make it very easy for any given employee. Matter of fact, they like it because it's easier to find the right stuff, and we don't get this landfill-like approach of all the documents piling up. It's actually easier because I can find the stuff. Next slide, please. So then, I'm using an email example. We put it in there. We make it really easy for employees to put it in there. Then we can start our cleanup processes. Then we can have the move it or lose it type of approach. Then we can say, well, we'll make it really easy. Matter of fact, it can be a record, or we can make it a working document. We're going to keep a little less as a working document, or we can make it reference information. But if you don't move it, then we're going to start losing it. So we're not taking stuff away. We're just giving people an easy place to put stuff, and then we start taking away. But again, we want to make it simple. We want to make it comprehensive, and we want to make it useful for the employees. But again, a lot of times we're thinking about deploying SharePoint, we're thinking about we just got to get the system set up, and this is part of the work that goes into making it useful and having a system that's fully used. Next slide, please. So then with the data placement strategy, because we've got the governance framework, we can then decide what goes into SharePoint. We can then decide, do we need an enterprise content management system? We can then decide, does this go into some type of archiving system? Or, and by the way, we may be very well surprised. We may find that we thought SharePoint didn't do this, but when we understand our requirements, we can put all the right stuff in the right places. We can put it, the email or the files, and we have the right repository for the right people to be able to look at. And again, this is the core of a data placement strategy out there. Next slide, please. So, okay, let's take a step back. We've got policies now. We've got the technology. We've got it configured. We're done, right? No, not really. Probably the largest single most overlooked component of successful either SharePoint deployments or information governance programs is the employee behavior change management process. How do we get people to move from their old behaviors to the new behaviors? Part of this is a training program. Part of this is saying, hey, we got to get you away, teach you the right place to put stuff. But part of this is a messaging and communication. How can we win not only the minds but the hearts of employees to use the new system, to put stuff in the right place, to sell them on the idea that this is a better approach so they'll make them more productive and make their organizations more collaborative. And so we see a combination here of really of getting the right messaging and communication with the right training programs with the right audit behind it, so we could move them from the old state to the new state. Again, a lot of times people just, well, we deployed SharePoint. Is anybody using it? No. All right, well, maybe one of the areas we're missing is an effective employee behavior change management strategy. Next slide, please. Part of that is understanding behavior. We have pilers. Some people like to pile. Some people like to file. Some people like to delete. Some people have people get it for them. The point here is the more we understand behaviors, the more we understand how people save stuff. I'm not going to be able to change that, but maybe I can accommodate behavior. Maybe I can have managed folders and have people to create subfolders within managed folders for my filers. Maybe I have managed folders and I let the pilers pile up in that. Maybe I audit to make sure that the leaders can delete stuff. But the point is, the more we understand how employees are actually using documents, and I'm using the word documents, which means records and non-records, the more we understand the business processes associated with those, the more effective we're going to be at getting deployment. And again, the theme is here the same. Let's understand what people are doing. Let's understand how they're using it. Then we'll design and set up our system to be effective in that respect. Next slide, please. Part of your communication plan is having the right plan. Part of it is having audience and timeline and content, having people on the IT desk as you move on over, having a hotline, having what we call, a white glove treatment for executives. There's a lot of different components to these types of programs, getting everybody in place to be able to do this. And again, I'm just touching on these, but these are some of the most overlooked components of an information governance program. Next slide, please. And finally, you can do this with the technology. Are people following it? Are people putting the right documents in the right place? Let's look at that programmatically. Let's make sure they're classifying records the right way. We think we've made it easier for you, and then strategy enforcement, making sure that we're enforcing this. And it's interesting. Some groups will follow it. Some groups will not. Why is this group not following it? Is it because they're bad? Well, could be. Or is it because maybe the training wasn't clear, or maybe they have record types that we haven't addressed, or maybe we misanalyzed the business value of the documents. And I'm not saying that everybody, you're going to have some outliers. You're going to have some people that do stuff the wrong way. You can then follow up on those people to be able to do that. But the point is, once we deploy the technology, we set up the right way, we do the communication, we do the audit in the back end, we'll be much more successful in terms of being able to do that. And defensibility with compliance or courts or regulators all comes from the fact that, well, we had a process and we checked up to make sure the process was working, and then we remediated, we fixed the areas that were not working. And so think about your audit, think about your enforcement strategies. Next slide. So just in conclusion, understand what your users are doing. Think about a data placement strategy. Understand how to deploy it, make it simple for them. Get it deployed, and then remediate it and fix it. And don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Too often organizations want a perfect policy or perfect strategy or perfect approach, and they don't do anything. And remember, these are inherently imperfect processes. Success comes from being able to do it the right way and then addressing it and improving over time. So again, do something good and improve it over time, but don't wait for something perfect, because you'll never get there. Next slide, please. So, if you've been paying close attention, you'll notice we glossed over a significant amount of content. We have a number of white papers and recorded webinars that talk about these issues, employee behavior change management, data placement strategies, getting employees to follow email classification strategies, get them to delete. So hopefully I've given you a bit of a taste today of some of the content we have available. This is all freely available content on the Contoural website, and so we have a lot of good information for you there. Next slide, please. Just real briefly, Contoural is the largest independent provider of information governance consulting services. We don't sell any products. We don't take any referral fees. We don't store any documents. We help more than 30% of the Fortune 500, and we help them with multiple phases of their information governance programs, including helping them deploy SharePoint or other types of enterprise content management and data placement strategies. And then I think this is my last slide, or this may be my next slide. And we'll talk about this then. We offer complimentary two-hour on-site seminar. I'm doing one of those tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to David. So David, I talked a little bit about, you know, how the ways you approach this. How do you set it up? Maybe you want to talk about some of the technology aspects of it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. That was very insightful and informative. I'm going to be expanding on some of your themes from a technology standpoint. Certainly, those things are quite jive quite well with the Harmony approach. Making it easy for the employee to do the right thing. Our slogan at Harmony is "Make the right thing the easy thing to do," and then people will be able to be compliant. And as you correctly pointed out, changing behavior is always the hardest part. So if you can make it easy and employ technology to make it easy for the employee to hide some of that complexity, then we can be more successful in these initiatives. So you talked about this, but maybe I'll just put it in the context of presenting Harmony, the technology solution. We see a couple of reasons for initiatives that are based on SharePoint that are not successful. Two of them, kind of the top two that we see, are both related to the human aspect of the initiative. As you correctly pointed out, deploying the technology is actually the easy part. It's getting people to do the right thing so that the initiative is successful and the goals of the business initiative are fulfilled. That's really the tough part. So the first part of that is low adoption of SharePoint. People resist. You talked about the 5-second rule. I mean the second one, not the one with the food falling on the floor. The one with making the right thing to be done within 5 seconds. If it is difficult, people will just ignore. They'll continue to store their documents. They'll send documents as attachments with an email. If they're email messages themselves, they just stay locked in personal inboxes that they're not accessible to other employees when they need to see those. And we see enormous numbers of organizations who still rely on email attachments to collaborate. So it's 3/4 of organizations are still doing that, even though they have the infrastructure to support SharePoint and share documents, both for documents and for email storage and management. The second problem, and as you also pointed out, is that if the documents are not correctly classified, then SharePoint becomes a document graveyard. You called it a dumping ground. Basically the same concept of you can't find anything afterwards because you're just putting stuff in there. If you ask employees to have to classify information or to specify metadata, well, that's too complicated. So the best you can hope for is for them to deposit the stuff in the repository. And in either case, the initiative basically fails because either the documents or the email messages are not available in the repository, or even if they are, you can't find them. You have no way to know about the retention capability, responsibilities, or the disposition of these documents, because it's just a big mess and a lot of chaos. So this is where Harmony comes in. You know, we talk about this concept of the last mile from a technology standpoint, where you can set up all those policies and rules and the taxonomy and the retention and the privacy. But if you do that and you don't get people to upload and classify both emails and documents, then all that good work comes to naught, because you can't manage what you don't capture and classify. And that's really where Harmony fits into the equation. And we'll see very briefly just a short demo of exactly how this works in your own environment. And so what we talk about is solving the last mile problem. It's really about the user experience. It's making sure that that 5-second rule becomes something which is almost a 0-second rule in many cases, and just so easy for folks to be able to do. So we say this is the four C's, or almost the four C's. You know, being able to capture documents and emails, and as Mark, you correctly pointed out, emails are documents for all intents and purposes. You know, if you have a proposal or a contract, sometimes you may just write that up in an email message and send it to somebody. There's no reason why that document would be stored in Outlook, whereas if you were to write that up in a Word document and have an attachment, that would need to be stored in a different place. That just doesn't make any sense today. So if you want other people to be able to have access to this information, it has to be stored in a centralized location, and that capturing is really critical, to be able to do that in a way that people don't have to invest a lot of time and effort. Secondly, the classification process. If it's not classified, you can't find it afterwards. There's no way to be able to again, if you set up the rules, you set up the taxonomy, you set up all the metadata requirements and definitions, if you can't get people to assign it properly, it ain't going to work. And the purpose of all that is so that you can later find what you're looking for, to be able to easily retrieve documents and emails without having to jump through hoops and go through a lot of different user experience, go to different browser windows, and to be able to look for it. Because people, at the end of the day, what they really want to do is focus on their work. They're not interested in learning your new technology. They're not interested in learning your new interfaces. They just want to be able to work without being disturbed. So that's critical. And lastly, the purpose of having the documents is manyfold. It's also, it is of course to be able to have records and retention and governance. Oftentimes it's also to make the information available to colleagues in cases, for example, where you're doing case management and multiple people are working on with a particular client. The emails and the documents that are shared with the client must be in a place and must be findable to other people who are working on the same client or case. And that's where Harmony comes in. So what Harmony is all about is making the right thing the easy thing to do. It's enabling employees to be able to do those, to capture and classify information, whether it's emails or documents, directly into SharePoint so that the information can be available later on. And of course, it makes sense for people to share documents in email because that's basically where people are spending their work time. Today, people are using email as a mechanism for sharing documents through attachments. So being able to capture those documents from the email window makes a lot of sense without requiring them to go to another application, another browser view perhaps, to go to the web version of SharePoint and try and learn how to upload documents from there. It's very complex. Even if you invest in training, at the end of the day, people really don't want to learn something new. They just want to continue doing what they're always doing, and that is basically spending their day in email. And that's the Harmony philosophy. It's working directly from your email and being able to capture, classify, and find your documents and emails, whether you're working on the desktop, on the Mac, the browser, or any host of mobile devices. So let's do a quick demo. I'm just going to switch over here and show you what this looks like in a live view. So let me just move this out of the way here. So what you see now is you're looking at my my email inbox, and what you'll see on the right side of the screen. I just gotta close this. Okay, I'm looking at my email inbox. So what you see on the right side of the screen is the Harmony sidebar. This appears directly in your Outlook window, and it makes it extremely easy to be able to just drag and drop documents and emails directly into SharePoint. So literally, I can just take an email and drag it right across and upload that email into SharePoint, into this location where I'm founding, which is the Ravenwood HQ. And you'll see a notification here at the top that email has already been stored and uploaded. If there was a location that had required metadata, I would be required to specify the required metadata. But in any case, you can see that the header information from the emails are automatically captured as metadata. So even if you don't do anything, Harmony is able to assign the email headers to SharePoint metadata. So you still are able to, those become indexed, so that becomes searchable. So that's almost an easy way, but that, even in that operation, requires people to do something, right? So it's not 5 seconds, it was maybe 2 seconds, maybe a second, but we make it even easier because the way we do it is to make it possible so that people don't have to change anything that they're doing whatsoever to be able to capture the information. And I'm going to demonstrate how that works here. So say I'm working on a project with my team. I'm going to send this to the marketing team, and I want to send the project status, and I'll send an email. Here is the project status, and I'm going to include a file. Right, this is just what everybody does all day, every day in Outlook, and then I hit send. But instead of that file being sent as an attachment, what you see is I get a pop-up, and this can be configured to work in different ways, but this is just a simple demonstration that I'm prompted by Harmony to upload both the document, and in this case I can also select the email message to SharePoint directly by just clicking yes. And what happens now is Harmony will strip off the attachment from the email. It will upload that email and the document directly to SharePoint. But wait, you'll see that I get a prompt in the Harmony window, which appears in the email window. And what it's asking me to do is to specify, you'll see there's some red dots here, is that there's required metadata. So in order to be able to classify this correctly, I need to supply some information. So these are the managed metadata fields, and I'm just going to select from these pull downs that have been defined. And basically, you can see some of the fields have been filled out automatically. Some of this can be automated. Of course, the policies can be applied here so that the fields can be automatically populated as well. And then I just click Save, and you'll see that that document now appears uploaded directly here in SharePoint. So I've done two things here. One is I've made it really simple for people to upload documents and emails. You'll see also in the email message before I send it that the attachment has been replaced with a link. This link, of course, fulfills and respects the SharePoint requirements for access control, so only people who are able to see this or have permission to see this will be able to see the document. And before you hit send, you can see that the document has been correctly classified and stored, and I haven't done anything else different. This is exactly what people do all day, every day in Outlook. So we've reduced the amount of training necessary to be compliant to absolutely zero. People don't have to do anything differently. Of course, all their SharePoint settings can be provisioned for them, so they don't have to set this up themselves. And they just walk in one day, and they'll find the Harmony sidebar in their email. And even if they don't even know what that is, as soon as they start to work, they'll be prompted to do the right thing. Okay. But even that requires people to do something. So what we've recently added is a capability to automatically capture information, emails that are sent to you, and upload those automatically to SharePoint. So it's quite simple, actually. What we do is we've mapped some of the Outlook folders directly to SharePoint folders and SharePoint libraries. So you can see here, if I were to drag an email message into a Outlook folder called Ravenwood HQ, you'll see in a moment that in a second that number 1 will disappear. That email message has now been automatically uploaded directly to SharePoint. In this case, there was no required metadata, so I wasn't prompted for any. But in that case, I might be prompted as well to see the metadata. And you'll see that. I'll refresh this, and we'll see the email appear here, right here. That appears here, and it also, in this case, the header information was captured as metadata as well. Now, you don't have to drag that information in. A lot of times what you can do is you can set Outlook rules so that when you receive an email that meets a specific criteria, it can automatically be uploaded to SharePoint without any human intervention. If you think about this, this is an amazing capability because it reduces the possibility for human error to absolutely zero. It completely automates the process of both capturing and classifying emails, and if there are attachments as well, directly within SharePoint without any human intervention. So now we've taken Mark's 5-second rule and turned it into a 0-second rule because the entire process is automated. Of course, there's a lot more to Harmony, but just for the purposes of showing what this is like and how it works, I think that is a good experience that you can see how Harmony makes it simple to take that human element out of the equation so that people can focus on work rather than focusing on manipulating data, which of course is again is the weakest link in the chain. So just to summarize quickly, the way Harmony makes this easy and allows your initiatives, your information governance, your record management projects, email management projects to succeed is one, by allowing people to continue to work in email. There's no need to go to the interface of the repository, thereby increasing SharePoint adoption. People don't have to learn something new. Secondly, treat emails as documents of records. We showed very briefly how you were able to capture both emails and documents and treat them exactly the same way within SharePoint so that all documentation for projects, for initiatives, can be viewed and searched for and found in exactly the same way, regardless of whether they're an email or they're a Word document or Excel file or a PDF file. Third, classifying using metadata. We showed how very easy it is to either drag a document into Harmony and be prompted for metadata, or to automatically upload emails through automation rules. In any case, you're always rules can be applied to automate the assignment of metadata, and in cases where you want people to specify required metadata, that they will be prompted to do so to make sure that everything that's captured is correctly classified. Further thing that we do that I don't have time to show here is we also allow people to access offline content securely, both from the desktop, from a laptop computer, and also from mobile devices. Very granular capabilities of storing and accessing offline and working with offline documents from a variety of different interfaces. All the email, whether it's on a mobile or on a desktop. Maybe one last word about Harmony. Over 1,000 enterprise customers, 1.8 million licensed users. Harmony is also working together tightly with Microsoft. Of course, a lot of what we're doing involves Microsoft technologies. We've been 3 years running. We've won App Awards and Partner of the Year Awards directly from Microsoft, and we work very closely with them on developing, working with them on the forward-looking roadmap. Of those customers, we've got customers of all different sizes and industries. Some of them you see here that are involved in things like records management, email management, mobile initiatives, collaboration projects, knowledge management. A lot of people now are on the Office 365 initiatives, moving to Office 365. If you're moving to Office 365, you need Harmony more than ever. There are many challenges associated in the 365 environment of users being able to manipulate and to be able to use the new tools and to stay current with those tools. And if you're interested in that, I suggest you follow up with us afterwards. Be happy to share information about what we do with Office 365 and how we help organizations make that migration and be successful when they're on Office 365. We'll turn it back over to Susan for the final section of the webinar. Thank you.
Hi. While we are answering your questions, which I see have come up, it was, as Mark mentioned at the beginning, if you would like Contoural to contact you, They're offering a complimentary 2-hour on-site seminar to qualified prospects. So please answer the question that you see on your screen now while I go to the questions. Just a second. All right, so I see the first question, David. In the case that Harmony is being used, but a user is trying to send a file to someone who is not authorized to get to the SharePoint, would the file still attach, and would it have the metadata stored for the SharePoint site at the same time?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So the answer is it depends. It depends on the version of SharePoint that you're using. It's SharePoint Online or 2013, 2016 or older. There are some new capabilities that allow you to selectively share information externally with people, and that is fully supported in Harmony, so you can use that. One of the capabilities that we've added because of questions like this and a great need to do this is you can also specify which domains you want to send links to and which domains you want to send attachments to. So you can have this set up, and customers do this, so that if it goes to certain domains, it will, say within your company, it will send links. Otherwise, it will send attachments. Of course, it's also possible for you to manually decide to send an attachment if it goes to somebody outside the organization. So there's a lot of flexibility. SharePoint's getting better with offering the capabilities, but all the capabilities that are available for selective sharing in SharePoint are directly available through the Harmony in Outlook in the email window.
Thank you, David. The next question is, does this work with Office 365 or just on-prem SharePoint and Exchange Outlook?
Yep, it works with all versions of SharePoint. It works with all the way back to SharePoint 2007. So everything from the latest version of Office 365 and SharePoint 2016 all the way back. As I said, all the features that are available in those particular versions are exposed through Harmony, which is another benefit, because when people, you may have a hybrid approach where you see some working with some sites on-prem and some in the cloud, and from a user perspective, they just appear as different sites within Harmony. They have no idea, they don't have a different user experience, they don't have to go to another window. For them, it just looks like another place to store and classify information. So that's another actually advantage of working with Harmony, because we are able to mask that inherent complexity of working in the hybrid environment.
You showed in your example how you dragged something into a folder and it went directly into Harmony and SharePoint. Does that work for all of my folders?
Not sure I understand the question. No. So when you have the windows in Outlook, those folders in Outlook are configured to map to SharePoint locations. So you set that up so that you have drop-off folders in Outlook. Those are special folders that are synced together with SharePoint. Even if you're offline, for example, and you go back online, those will be synced. But that does not work for every folder in Outlook.
Does Harmony work with Outlook rules?
Yeah. So when the mechanism for creating the automation of uploading of documents, of uploading of emails, is done through the regular Outlook rules. There's nothing that you need to learn or anything specific. You can basically set the criteria for an email, and if the email coming in meets that criteria, it can automatically be sent to the special Outlook folder that then gets synced with SharePoint.
All right. So if there are any other questions, we'll get back to you afterwards. Mark and David, I'd like to thank you for that great presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone else for joining us today. You'll receive an email with a link to view the webinar again within a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.